All right, good morning. It is Friday. Let's do a little recap of the Thursday night football game between the Vikings and the Eagles. I had said that I picked Philly to win this game. I said if I was willing to bet on this game, that I would want to take, more likely, I'd want to take the Vikings plus the 6.5, 7 points. It was a 6 point game, so that did in fact hit. And I also said I would consider the over, which was, I believe, 48 and a half, 49, and the over went well over that. So both of those did hit. Now into the game. Um, I had said coming into this that it wasn't necessarily a must win for either team, but it was as close to a must win as you could really have in week 2 for either team. And Philly ended up pulling it out. Vikings now sitting at 0-2, Philly sitting at 2-0. And I had said I thought Philly would kind of get it together. I felt like their coaching staff would start piecing it together. I mean, having two new coordinators, you're bound to take a little bit of time to get things going. And it looked like they kind of did that in the first quarter. They really weren't getting anything going on offense. Really, the only offense in the first quarter was a deep pass to Devontae Smith. And after that, the offense really wasn't doing anything. In fact, they were getting booed off the field after going 3 and out on one drive. So what did they do? They went back to their bread and butter. They started running the ball, and they ran the ball extremely well. As a team, they rushed the ball 48 times. That is a lot of rush attempts. 48 rush attempts. They ended up with 259 yards on the ground. DeAndre Swift with the main load of that with 28 carries by himself for 175 yards. He had a touchdown. Hurts had two rushing touchdowns, which they were both quarterback sneaks at the goal line. And with that, it's the running backs get behind the quarterback and push. I know a lot of people don't really care for that. The competition committee reviewed it and decided to allow it for this year. They'll probably revisit it next year. I don't really expect that to stick around long term. And but Philly, when things started getting tough, they went to what they do best, and that's run the ball. They got good pushes from the offensive line, and they just started running the ball, which really did good in two ways. One, allowed them to control the ball, control the clock, and it was productive. So they put points up, they took time off the clock, kept Kirk Cousins on the sideline, and that allowed them to get into the lead. At one point, it was 27-7 in the third quarter. Really looked like the game was over at that point, but Minnesota did claw their way back in. Minnesota's biggest issue in this game, really, they had two of them. One, they turned the ball over 3 or 4 times in the first quarter. 3 times in the first quarter. It's all fumbles. One on a punt return, one on a run. Um, Kirk Cousins got strip sacked for one, and then later in the game, um, I believe it. I think it was right before halftime. Maybe I'm not sure the exact timing, but Cousins completed a deep pass to Justin Jefferson inside the 5. He tried to reach across the goal line, ended up losing the ball. It fumbled, came out of his hands, crossed the goal line, went out of bounds, which resulted in a touchback for Philly, and they turned around and went and got 3 points off of it. I believe that was right before halftime. I know a lot of people don't really care for that rule. I myself, I'm kind of indifferent about it. I mean, it is kind of a sketchy rule. I mean, you I don't understand why that's a turnover on downs. Like, you didn't lose. Yes, you lost the ball, but just because it goes in the end zone and goes out of bounds in the end zone, I don't see why you're penalized for that. I mean, if anything, back it up to the 5 yard line or 10 yard line, and you know let the team keep possession of it. I mean, obviously you can't give them a touchdown because they fumbled it out through the end zone, but I don't see why it's a turnover. But anyway, Minnesota turned the ball over 4 times early in the game. Philly eventually started taking advantage of that. But the other big issue for Minnesota is their running game. Two weeks in a row, their running game has been non-existent. They only rushed the ball 9 times last night for a total of 28 yards. It's barely 3 yards per carry. I'd said last week, it was kind of an issue. They had 41 rush yards last week on 17 attempts. That's 2.4 yards per carry. And Madison being the lead back, he was barely over 3 yards per carry last week, and last night he was essentially barely over three last night. I mean, I'd said in my earlier videos that I thought their running game was going to be an issue this year with having moved off Dalvin Cook, and through 2 games, it's really showing to be an issue. Kirk Cousins played really well. He he did have a strip sack, not really his fault. Somebody hit him from behind, but he did have a fumble lost. Passing wise, he was 31 of 44, essentially 66%, almost 75% completion, really, and 364 yards, 4 touchdowns. Very good numbers on his part. 125.6 quarterback rating. I know there's a big narrative about Kirk Cousins not playing well in Monday or primetime games. That's kind of an inaccurate narrative. That narrative started out as Kirk Cousins not being able to win on Monday Night Football, which was true. He started out 0-9 in his career on Monday Night Football, and at this point he is 2-10 on Monday Night Football. He's only won twice. Both times I believe were against the Bears. But that narrative was accurate, and then people just slowly evolved it into Kirk Cousins doesn't play well in primetime or in playoff games. And I didn't look up playoff games, but I did look up Kirk Cousins' last 10 primetime games. And in those games, the Vikings are 5-5, so 50-50 basically. I mean, it is. But in those games, of the 5 losses, 3 were by single digits. One was by 6 points, one was by 4 points, and one was by 1 point. And the other 2 were 17 points and 19 points. And of those 2, I got it wrote down here. The 17-point loss was Monday Night Football week 1 or week 2. I think it was week 2 last year against Philadelphia. And Cousins threw for 221, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. So no, he didn't play well in that one. But the 19-point loss was a couple years ago against the Saints. I believe it was like a Christmas Day game, maybe, or it was around Christmas. It was the game that Alvin Kamara rushed for 6 touchdowns. They lost that game 52-33, and Kirk Cousins threw 291 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So, by all means, Kirk Cousins played really well in that loss, and his defense really let him down by letting Kamara score 6 touchdowns on the ground that game. So, it is a team sport. I'm not someone that likes to give quarterbacks credits for wins and losses because it's a team sport. It's 22 people out there you got 11 on offense, 11 on defense. You have coaching staff. A win and a loss is really a credit to everyone, positive or negative. So I don't like to say all of these are on Cousins, but over his last 10 primetime games, like I said, this is not including playoffs, this is strictly primetime, nighttime games. One of these is a London game, which was not primetime for us, but in London, with the time difference, it's considered primetime. Uh, 2,289 yards, roughly 230 yards per game average, 22 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and 94.7 quarterback rating. The rating is pretty average, but almost 3-to-1 touchdown ratio, 230 pass yards per game. Those are not bad stats whatsoever. So the narrative that Kirk Cousins doesn't play well in primetime games, or that the Vikings always get blown out in primetime games, that's not accurate. The one exception to this, the Vikings had a primetime game against Green Bay in 2021 at the end of the season. Cousins did not play. I believe he had COVID, or he might have had injury, but he did not play in that game. The Vikings lost 37-10. Uh, that game was one of the games late in the season that really boosted Rodgers into that second consecutive MVP. But anyway, back to this game. So it's 27-7 late in the third quarter. The Vikings get the ball. They go down. They end up scoring. I believe this was the drive they threw the long pass to Addison, the rookie receiver, and he took it into the end zone. Philly gets the ball back. They get down into the red zone. You have the break between the third and fourth quarter, and coming out of that break, it showed on camera Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown somewhatly having a heated exchange. AJ Brown obviously wasn't happy, and you could read Hurts' lips. I got you, like I got you. So it's pretty obvious that Brown was not happy with his production. I mean, he in the game he was only targeted 6 times. He had 4 catches for 29 yards, and coming out of that first play, Cousins threw a ball to Brown, ended up being a touchdown that got called back for a holding penalty. Second down, through our next play, threw another pass into the end zone to Brown, barely out of his reach. He kind of got hit right as the ball got there, but barely out of his reach. You could see that Hurts come out trying to feed the ball to Brown at that point, and I think that was a mistake because midway through the second quarter, you started pounding the ball, and all third quarter, you were pounding the ball, and it was working. And all of a sudden, your number one receiver is not happy. I mean, Devontae Smith was getting the good looks. I mean, he had 4 catches, 131 yards, and a touchdown. And at that point, like you have a 13-point lead going into the fourth quarter. Like it's a two-score game and you're winning. Like you have no reason to be complaining about your lack of production at that point. Like your goal is to win games. If you're a team player and you and winning is the goal. Like I don't care if I mean I'm stuttering here, but I don't understand why you would complain about not getting the ball thrown your way when you're winning the game. That is the goal, is to win. And you're up by 2 scores. Like at this point, you should be playing safe. You should be running the ball, running the clock. You're in field goal range. Essentially make this a 16-point game by kicking that field goal and the game's over. But instead, you're crying to your quarterback. You're throwing a fit on the sideline that you want more production, and he starts throwing it your direction. You get a holding penalty. You get a barely missed pass in the end zone, and then all of a sudden Hurts gets sacked twice back to back. You're out of field goal range, so you've got a punt. You get no points out of this, and then Minnesota turns around and takes it down the field and scores again, and it's a 6-point game. It's 27-21 at that point. And now what a game that could have essentially been locked up and over with is now a one-score game, and you still got to go out there and play. And that was really really selfish on Brown's part to throw that fit at that point, and it was a bad decision on Hurts's part to actually start feeding him the ball. That's as an elite quarterback, as to be considered a top quarterback in the league, it shouldn't matter who wants the ball. The name of the game is winning, and Hurts should have never started trying to feed him the ball. He should have kept playing the way he was playing, and the Vikings should have kept, not the Vikings, the Eagles should have kept handing the ball off. And ultimately, it didn't matter because Philly went down, scored, made it 34-21. Vikings get the ball, they go down, score again, make it 28-34. They try onside kick, don't get it, grind the clock out, and all the Vikings had to do was they had time to throw a Hail Mary, which didn't matter. But like I said, Philly, they they went to their bread and butter halfway through the game, started running the ball. They looked great in the running game. Like every one of their running backs really had good production. Rashad Penny only had 3 carries, but Boston Scott 5 carries, 40 yards. DeAndre Swift 28 carries, 175 yards. Great production. I'm sure a lot of people probably didn't play him in fantasy, and that's probably not good. But ultimately, they started to click a little bit better on offense. They still need to get their defense together. They have 2 more manageable games to do so, Buccaneers and the Commanders. Meanwhile, as I said the other day, the Vikings have a rough little stretch coming up. Um, I mean, they really don't have a whole lot of time to figure this out. I mean, they're sitting at 0-2. They got the Chargers coming to Minnesota next week. Their offense is going to score points. Then they have the Panthers. That's a manageable game. And then they have the Chiefs. And then that's a tough game. They have the Bears, which is manageable, have the 49ers and Packers. And like I said the other day, they could very easily be sitting at 3-5 halfway through the season. And I mean, if you're sitting at 2-4 or 1-5, and I'm not sure exactly when the trade deadline is, but if you only have one win at the trade deadline and Kirk Cousins is in a contract year and probably won't be there next year, I mean, you can't retain him, you can't franchise tag him. Like, you might want to try to trade him and get some kind of compensation for him. I mean, he has no trade clause, so he has to agree to it. But I mean, a team like the Jets that is down from Aaron Rodgers, I mean, you could see them reach out and maybe try to offer a second, third round pick. I think second might be a little high for Cousins, but third round pick, fourth round pick, I mean, it could happen. Minnesota just could go ahead and say, you know what, we're going to build for the future and try to get a good quarterback in the draft. But either way, something to keep an eye on. As I predicted, Vikings could end up looking bad halfway through the season. Uh, Philly, like I said, they need to get their business together over the next couple games because later in the season they start having some very tough stretches. But ultimately, they're a good team, and good teams play bad and find ways to win. They did that last week. They did that early in this game. And bad teams play good and find ways to lose. So ultimately, I think Philly's going to be okay. They still have some time. I'll jump on here either later today or tomorrow. I know college football is on tomorrow, but I'll give out the rest of my game picks for the week. We started this week out 1-0 with this game, and I'll catch y'all then.